Well, hello everyone. My name is Nick Fitzke, and I'm a professor in chemistry at Mississippi State University. And we're going to start a new series today on installing a helium recovery and recycling system. And as part of this, we're going to outline as we go along the process here at MSU, sort of covering all the successes and pitfalls and victories and defeats that we go through during this process. And so this is going to be the first part of a several part series, and we'll hopefully see it through to the end and have a successful story to tell at the end of it. Why am I doing this? Right. The question is interesting because I could be writing grants or writing papers, and so there's a couple of reasons why we're going to document our helium system in this way. The first is that, well, one, I've made the commitment to the National Science Foundation, and so we've said, hey, we're going to use a little bit of a different approach here for our helium recovery system, and as part of that approach, we're going to share our plans and process with others, so that hopefully other people can benefit from our knowledge and mistakes in real time. And so the first reason we're doing this is just because we've told the funding agency that we're going to do that, and we're appreciative for the funding, but we're going to live up to our end of the bargain too. The other thing that we're trying to do is we are trying to help smaller and mid-size NMR facilities who are looking to do helium recovery, maybe on a little bit of a budget without the expense, or maybe you don't have the space for a large helium storage bag. And that was one of our major concerns in our department. And so we are working through those details, and that's one of the unique features of the solution that we're trying to implement here at Mississippi State University. And so we want to be a resource for other facilities, just as we've found resources on the web for larger facilities. And we've certainly learned a lot from those facilities, and we've benefited a great deal from what's already out there. But since our facility is a little bit smaller than maybe some of the ones that have publicized their successes so far, we're going to do that and hopefully show you guys in real time how we're working it. And then finally, we're just, I'm particularly committed to the sustainability of NMR as a science, as a discipline, whether that's training graduate students, whether that's working with postdocs, or whether it's working with other faculty at other facilities. You can't make a technique as complicated as NMR accessible without people who are willing to put in the time and share what they know and hopefully help others along the way. And so you don't get a lot of credit for that in the scientific community, but it's a labor of love, and those of us who really enjoy teaching and mentoring and providing resources like this, we do it because we enjoy it, and we know it's going to make the scientific community a better place. And so those are kind of the reasons why we're going to do this video. I think to start out, definitely need to provide some big thank you shout outs to folks in the community, because a lot of the resources here I have had a lot of assistance with. And so this is sort of our slide of thanks. First off, Hanno Leeson at Georgia Tech. He's literally spent hours with me on the phone, sort of answering questions, going over resources. He sent me pictures from his facility, and that's been a tremendous help in getting me to where we are today. Sarah at Iowa State is also been an incredible resource. She's shared slides on the web, but she's also communicated back and forth a little bit via email and even via Twitter to provide some ideas and help for planning a system like this. And Iowa State is kind of the prototypical system for helium recovery, and we've definitely benefited from their resources that they've shared on the web. Ron Shin and Will Platzik at UAB, they're the closest big facility, or the bigger facility that I would say is nearby, and so they've shared a lot of their resources. They've gone through this process as well, installing a helium recovery system, and so they've talked me through some of their thought processes and how they were thinking about managing their system. The Yale Biophysical Instrumentation Center, I haven't met with anybody there personally, but they have a great website, and I will try to link that in the description below so that you can see it and access their videos, which are also very helpful. The Minnesota NMR Center also has a document on the web that sort of outlines their system, which doesn't use a large copper helium manifold, and we didn't decide to go that route in this installation or in our installation, but we've definitely learned a few things from that document. Finally, well, not finally, but there's also been numerous sales reps and technical support people that have spent time with me, time talking on the phone. Take advantage of those individuals if you work with them. They sort of are the frontline knowledge for a lot of what we're trying to do, and so they've sort of helped me understand what's going on with these types of systems. I have to thank our facilities team. I mean, they haven't done a whole lot yet, but we've done a lot of planning and meeting together. And Fred Mock heads up the facilities team at Mississippi State. And, there's numerous plumbers, electricians that are all getting involved with this project. And so, they're great folks. You need those kinds of folks. And so always listen to them and take them seriously. And as you work through processes like this. Program officers in the National Science Foundation we also have to thank because of their support, their help, obviously funding, and none of this could be happening without that funding agency. And so that's kind of where we're at, and I think it probably makes sense just to jump into it. I don't want this to be a very long video. And so thinking about what we're doing in the NMR facility is this is basically what we're dealing with, right? And so it's a little cut off here at the bottom, but this is distance in feet. So this is the space that we have to work with at Mississippi State, and this is kind of a hybrid model. What you're actually seeing here is not exactly what's currently there, and it's not exactly what's planned either. And so importantly, we also recently received an NSF grant to install an 800 megahertz NMR, and so this is currently not installed, and that should be hopefully installed in December. We have our existing 600 megahertz, 500 megahertz, and 300 megahertz system, and then we also have an old EPR system, and that's not going to be connected to a helium recovery manifold or anything like that. We don't use it at low temperature enough to warrant that. However, the EPR currently sits up in this corner where the 800 is going to be. And so that's why I said this is not quite the way it is in our facility. But you can see 4 magnets, all of them, non-pumped magnets, not a whole lot of boil-off really to worry about, and not a very large facility. I mean, it certainly suits our needs, and we're very thankful for the instrumentation. But it's not, we don't have 10 to 12 magnets, and we don't have a lot of pumped magnets that we have to worry about either. And so I figure that a lot of facilities are probably in a similar situation like this. They don't have a lot of magnets, but they have enough that the helium crisis has really started to feel the pain over the last couple of years. And so a helium recovery system that's multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars plus thousands of dollars of building upgrades is probably out of reach for most, but for a system like ours, it certainly could make an impact and help increase the sustainability of our system, particularly given that helium is a limited natural resource. And so thinking in the long term, these instruments are hopefully going to be there for many years to come. And so looking at this, we don't have a lot of, we don't have the luxury of a large storage area. We don't have the luxury of a basement that we can, put a helium bag. And this is on the ground floor of the chemistry building. And, this hallway leads up to the facility. Out here is basically outside. So this is the exterior wall. This is all exterior walls. So these doors open up out to exterior. But then on the other end, or the in this case the bottom end of this diagram, this is basically all the state chemical lab. And so we share our first floor with the state chemical lab. They do a lot of pesticide analysis. They do a lot of chemical analysis for the state under state contract. They're also the folks that do the octane, the measurements for gasoline certification in the state. And so they have a large footprint on this first floor, and we simply just don't have a lot of space where we can store something. And so when we started this project, we needed something that was going to fit within this footprint, and we just didn't have a lot of space to put a large helium bag. And so starting out, we initially started to talk to folks, and we were looking at the different types of facilities that were available. And the process by which you start to spec out one of these helium recovery and recycling systems is going to be very much the same. If you end up doing a bagless type of an install like we're hoping to do, or if you do a bagged recovery bag, the process is going to be basically the same. And so the first step, most of you probably are keenly aware of this over the last several years, but the first step is to figure out how much your helium you're actually using. And so in that sense, you're interested in a couple of things. Obviously, you want the magnets so that you have a inventory of how much helium each magnet holds. But more importantly than the helium capacity of each magnet, you need to understand your steady state boil off rate and your typical helium fill. And again, I sort of knew our total helium use numbers going into this process, and I appreciated that it was costing us more and more as the years went on. But I didn't necessarily at the beginning of this understand what my boil off rates were, and I didn't think enough about our helium fills to think about how much helium we're actually going through in the process of a helium fill. And so first to note is that, again, this 800 megahertz is not installed yet, and so I had to call around and get some estimates, look at the spec sheets, talk to people who had these types of a magnet, and get a feeling for what they're actually doing in their helium fills. And the other thing I had to do was I had to go and look at all of my magnets and see what, or all of the university's magnets, and see what the helium use was, or the boil off rate. And so in our case, we do all of our own helium fills here. I know some smaller institutions might contract that out, but we often try to, in cases where we can, we try to train students to do it. But for helium, it's usually a supervised type of an activity. And in this case, we had to go around and all of our instruments, and you know this probably too, all of your instruments will have this helium flow meter, and this is how you estimate your loss or your helium boil off rate as a function of time. So this is liquid helium per hour, and then you can convert that to the liters rate. Now in my case, I had to make sure that all of my helium plumbing from the magnet was tight. Again, since sometimes we use students or we have different people doing a helium fill, they don't always reattach the helium pipe, tubing as tightly as maybe they should. And so I had to tighten everything down to make sure that this was truly reflecting the boil off rate. And it's one of these kinds of valves where you might have to tap it a few times to get an accurate reading. But after that, I was able to get a reasonably good estimate for my helium boil off rates, and then the other thing is not just how big is your typical helium fill, but how long does it take you to do that fill. And that was something that, again, we didn't necessarily understand when we first started, but we've had to do some bookkeeping and track it down, and these are the numbers that we came up with. And so it's not only just how much helium you use, but then how quickly do you fill it. And if you're filling it according to Brooker's guidelines on the side of the magnet, it's going to take a little while. And so we ended up with about 100 liters per 75 minutes was our largest fill. And again, the way that you're going to work your helium recovery is probably not going to be the way you're filling helium now. For us, what we do is we have a day where we just pump all the helium into the magnets, and then we brush off our hands for the next 3 months, and then we do it again. The way the helium recovery system is going to work is it's really a question of capacity. And so any conversation you have with the sales rep that handles helium recovery will lead to a table like this, where they'll want to know about how much helium you're going through and how quickly you're going through it, so that they can figure out what your capacity is. And so that sort of takes us to the big question that you're going to be asking at those meetings is, how much helium do you need to handle in your recovery system at once? And so for us, we're no longer going to be doing all 4 magnets in a single day. We're going to be doing a more staggered approach where we collect helium, but then in that case, the largest fill is going to be your capacity step. Right? And so the key numbers through this process that I was able to track down, I think they'll hold for you as well, is your helium expansion ratio. So this is the volume that you expand as you go from 1 liter of liquid helium to X number of liters of gaseous helium at room temperature. And so for helium, that's about 750 or 745. And so if I have a liter of liquid helium, it's going to expand into about 745 liters of gaseous helium. And that's why we're all concerned about safety in the NMR facility, right? So that's a very large number. But then the other one that I basically talked to several sales reps, and they all pretty much gave me the same value, is how much of your helium is lost to the atmosphere during a fill, right? So if we go back to this previous slide, if I put in 100 liters of helium, how much of that just is boil off because you don't put every single liter of liquid helium into the dewar of your magnet? And so the number that kept coming up is to about 25%. And so for us, this means that of that 100 liters, about 25 liters of liquid helium are basically wasted as you do your fill of this magnet. And so it's a round estimate, but it's going to be something that you have to consider. And so then once you sort of have those two numbers down, then you figure out, okay, what's your biggest or your highest capacity helium fill, and how are you going to spread that out over time? And so this is a case where we can now take a brief pause and say, how might we do some calculations? Because one of the specs that you're going to have to work with your helium recovery vendor is how much flow capacity your compressor can handle as it's trying to recover the helium during a helium fill. So if we go to our handy dandy calculation pad, welcome to Chemistry 101, everybody, and do some of the calculations. Again, recall that our largest helium fill for really the 600 and the 800 is going to be 100 liters of liquid helium in 75 minutes. And thinking along that, and now that lines, that's basically what the system has to recover. But the recovery calculation is not handled in liquid helium. It's usually liters per minute or standard cubic feet per minute. And so we've got to convert this into how much gaseous helium the helium compressor actually has to recover. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to convert that. And so this is where our expansion ratio comes in. So we have 745 liters of helium gas for every 1 liter of helium liquid. And then remember that our estimate is that if we're putting in 100 liters of that into the NMR, only 25% of that is actually coming off, is lost. And so that's what we're trying to recover. is that 25%. And so we multiply that by 25%. And that sort of tells us how much helium per minute that we have to handle. And so in our case, this isn't a terribly difficult calculation to do, but you can run it through your calculator if you're curious. So 100 times 745 divided by 75, and then multiply that by 0.25 for 25%, and we get about 248 liters per minute. Right? And so this number here is a good number to have, and again, you'll discuss this with your sales rep for whoever's handling your system, but that's going to be basically the capacity of the helium recovery system. And again, recovery is going to be what actually captures the gaseous helium during your fills and allows you to compress that into the storage container that you're going to be using. And so thinking about that, that's the first step of the helium recovery process. Now that particular number might be augmented. Obviously, you might have other magnets boiling off at the same time that you're doing a helium fill. And so, that's just an estimate and an example calculation that you might find. But once you have that idea, you know pretty much what your pump capacity has to be. And most of the helium vendors that I spoke with, that's a very common number that's going to be on the specifications, is how much helium can the recovery pump handle, and then where is it going to store that helium. And so for us, that was where we maybe deviate a little bit from the traditional approach for helium recovery. Right? So the traditional solution is a large storage bag. Oftentimes this is 4 feet by 6 feet by 3 feet, something like that. Keep in mind, you're storing the vapor that's coming off of your helium fill, and so you've got to put that somewhere, and the traditional approach is to put that into a large storage bag. And that works for many people, but again, the size of our facility just didn't allow us to accommodate a bag like that. And at the same time, we didn't have any, obvious external places where we could build either a small hut or something like that to put a large storage bag. Obviously, you want it to be in a climate-controlled space, away from bugs and everything else that can degrade bags over time. And so the solution that we are going with, or that we're working with now, is to use low-pressure tanks. And so low pressure is a term that's sort of, what is low pressure? In our case, it's about 100 psi, right? And so we're going to be storing the helium from our boil off and from our fills in a series of low pressure tanks that are going to capture that helium while it's being stored in preparation for liquefaction. And so the storage capacity of the tanks that we're going to use, it's about 4 liters of liquid helium per tank. That amounts to being 30 inches in diameter by about 52 inches tall. And in our case, that ended up being 8 tanks plus a ballast tank, right? And so there needs to be a little tank to store things as it's pumping up the larger, higher pressure. And so that ends up being 9 tanks total, but one of those is kind of an intermediate storage location. And so effectively, if we take 8 of those 100 psi tanks, that allows us to store approximately 32 liters of liquid helium in tanks that we can now place along the highway or along the hallway. And so again, we don't need a large location for a helium bag. We can place those tanks along the entry hallway. And then after this, the liquefier can liquefy this over time, and we're basically going to be looking at about 15 liters of liquid helium per day, or more. And in that case, we could take our largest fill and convert it back into liquid helium in about 2 days' time. Right? And so that's the other part of this equation, is once you have your helium storage, how is the liquefier going to take that stored helium and then convert it back into liquid helium? And so this was sort of ultimately the setup. Now in the next video we'll go into a lot more details. We're still working with the facilities folks to try and put all the specs in, but as you can see, here are the magnets that we propose to install or to have, and where they should go. And in this hallway, we had, we've envisioned having that series of low pressure tanks along the hall. The width of the hall is such that we can still put this item, when we put a door at the end of it, it's no longer a hallway. From the fire department's point of view, it's a room, but we still want to keep safety as a priority here, and so there's plenty of room for walking or traveling through the hallway. These tanks aren't going to obstruct the hallway, and then over here would be our liquefier and helium compressor. And in our case, we're going to designate a small amount of space where we can store our liquid helium dewar, which can also sort of sit there and then can be rolled into the facility when we need to do fills. But this allows us to basically accomplish the task of helium storage and helium recovery as we, in the small amount of space that we have. Right now, we're planning to leave this door at the end of the hall. We're going to install a new door at the end of this area as well, and that will provide security for the helium system. And then the other thing to consider is we had thought about maybe taking this door off, but since some of these compressors can be loud, we're leaving the door in for some noise reduction. As I said, we'll talk more about the details. We're still working out some of the details here. And we just met with facilities yesterday, and so I hope to have a lot more detail about how this system will be installed. But this is basically the key components that we need for our system. And then the final thing I guess I didn't mention is this water chiller. And so both of these instruments generate a lot of heat, and so you need some way to cool them down. And so the water chiller will help with that as well. And so that's essentially what we hope to do for our helium recovery system. The other thing that we'll talk again in a lot more detail in a future video is this recovery manifold, and that's this red line here, right? And so there needs to be a way to take the helium boil off from our 4 magnets and route it all the way back in here to the compressor, where it then can be stored in these tanks. And so again, that's another detail that we'll go into later, but that's also shown here as sort of our initial plan. Maybe in the next video we'll hear that this is all different now, but hopefully it'll stay the same, and so that's hopefully where we'll give you more details about how we're actually going to connect the magnets to the manifold, and we'll give you an update on how the overall process is going. But until then, thank you for your time. I appreciate you watching this video. We don't produce a lot of videos, but if you like what you're seeing on our channel, please like and subscribe. And hopefully we'll see you next time. Bye.